Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please allow me to welcome on stage David Somers. David is the CEO of IPSOS in Pan-Africa. He has over 15 years in research, mostly in Africa. He's worked for agencies, including TNS, as a regional manager. And he also holds a master's in psychology and business administration. He's the current CEO of IPSOS in Africa and covers 8 countries. This is Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Zambia, Mozambique, Ivory Coast, Nigeria, and Ghana. Well, apart from that rich CV.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome also in these difficult times to get here. Some of you have been struggling to get through the demonstrations. Hopefully they weren't too bad. But yeah, I think this topic is very important for all of us. It's a topic to talk about the African lions, and the definition of African lions for us is this demystification of what this middle class in this region is all about. We embarked, and I think Aggrey is going to give a little bit more detail, but together with the UCT Unilever Institute, we embarked on a study about 18 months ago to really try to understand who this African middle class really is. We saw in the news people talking about that there was a serious overestimation of this middle class. A lot of business plans have gone wrong, projections have gone seriously wrong, and some of our clients even considering pulling out of this region and out of sub-Saharan Africa because of it. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to the CEO for IPSOS East Africa, Aggrey Oriwo. I know most of you know him very well. He's a very likable guy. Spends a lot of time with you in your offices. Aggrey has been with IPSOS, prior with IPSOS, he's been with Sinovate. I don't know his full CV actually, but he's been in research for quite a lot of years. And it's great to have him leading our teams here in East Africa. Besides looking after Kenya, he's also responsible for Uganda, Tanzania, Zambia and Mozambique, but luckily we have him based here in Nairobi. Aggrey, talk to us about African lions.
Thank you very much, David. David can really make you feel that you're very important and tell you that you're the right person, very likable person in Kenya. That's very relative. So let me start by saying my name has already been said, Aggrey Oriwo. And in these times of Kenya, you need to say your name fully so that the Kenyans in the house can place you conveniently in their head and decide how to listen to you. And I wish you know that that very, very basic thing and the way we place people happens. And somebody picked it up in one of Barack Obama's books and said, when Barack Obama wanted to talk about Joseph Conrad, who wrote about the Heart of Darkness in Africa, he needed to read his second name to listen to understand his views about that book. So it's important, it's intellectually honest now to come in front of you and say, these are my full names, so that you can place me very well. Anyway, Africa Lions and the middle class, I think, is a very, very controversial issue. It's an issue that we've had going on in Africa for a very long time. In Kenya, people say, why is it that the middle class is happening like this? How come in Kileleshwa we have all these apartments without people living in them? Who lives in these apartments? There's one of our drivers who retired who used to ask me, where are people buying all these cars? There are some visitors who come to Kenya and say they can't be a middle class here. Why come they're all driving old jalopy Toyotas? Is this really a middle class? How come they're not buying? There's a time Starterford apparel shop came into East Africa and closed in Junction. I don't know whether you even saw it there, because a shirt was going for 10,000 shillings, and you thought that there was the market for that, and nothing happened. And they had to close and pack and go back. And so many other people, you remember Supreme Furnitures came from South Africa, set up here, and they went away. So everybody has been saying, is there really a middle class in this place? Or is it so fleeting that we cannot feel it or touch it? It vanishes every time we make our plans as CEOs, And then we go back to our boards, to our bosses, and tell them, oh, we couldn't make it because the middle class is not there. IPSOS, together with the Unilever Institute, decided to look at this again and try and debunk some of these myths that we have had about the middle class. Are they there? Were they part of the people who are running around here and smoking tear gas? Are they the people who are in this room talking? Are they the people who are not in that team you're seeing outside there? Perhaps it's something we need to ask ourselves. But we always say, before we even do this presentation, we always like to debunk some myths. So we always ask you to look at the person next to you. Just turn and look at the person next to you. You know, the truth is that that person you're seeing next to you is not middle class. And not that he's lower than middle class. Actually, the person you're seeing next to you is heading towards affluent. He's not the middle class. So you set up your targets for these people. These are people who, a good example I give people is a mobile phone, a smartphone. What is the average cost of a smartphone that all of you have here? I can best my last Kenya shilling that I will not get a phone costing less than 20,000 shillings here in this room. At a particular point, we decided to do a study that required us to look for people with dumb phones so that we could give them smartphones. And my colleague and friend Annette knows this very well. We looked for people with dumb phones so that we could give them smartphones. And we decided to do a test study in our offices. And we started with the cleaners. Do you have a smartphone? Believe it or not, even the guards at the gate have smartphones. So we start asking, who is the middle class? It was so difficult to find and point out a person who had a dumb phone. Let's start going. I was just setting the mood. So, that is my friend Daktari Muya's predecessor. At one point, he mentioned that it will be very great if every Kenyan was in the middle class. Almost later on, you'll see the great Greek philosopher Aristotle also comes up and says something like that. That it's very great if every Kenyan would be in the middle class by 2030. I don't know, Daktari, whether that still stands.
Well, we want the country to be upper middle income. Every Kenyan to be middle class.
Yes.
It's not easy.
Yes. That is a very, very good aspiration. And let's see whether we are there. There have been so many people talking about Africa rising, issues about Africa. That is a... Laban talked about the fourth estate. They have a view, and they have been publishing. Shiro will tell you, yes, you've been publishing all those things, and some of those things are not very, very true. They are not factual, and they are not really what happened. But this is what has been going on in the press. And you see a lot of acres of print, a lot of airtime spent discussing the middle class. Somebody came and described one very, very, very affluent young man. I would almost say an over-rich person who just got rich the other day with his 3 cars in the parking lot, taking his children to James Cambridge and all that, and said, yeah, this is a kind of middle class. The economy is really doing well. It's a burgeoning economy. The middle class is growing. And most of you wonder in the boardrooms which middle class is growing. It's only the middle of people like Aggrey that is growing. It's not the middle class. Let's continue. I mentioned that about Obama, and Obama comes and says, Africa has a middle class that is rising. He said this when he was there. And sooner than later, that middle class will be buying iPhones, because that is the picture that is in the West of a middle class person. A person who queues outside an Apple shop because there's iPhone what now? 8. And on a very serious note, you start asking yourself, all of you whom I call affluent, how many of you own iPhones? Yeah, you'll find that the iPhone level here, yeah, all? Not. You see. You see. So it tells you that, yes, perhaps it's a measure in the West, but the way we look at it, we're almost bringing one size to fit everybody. One thing I'd like to tell you for sure, the middle class in Africa must not necessarily own an iPhone. That's something that needs to sit behind our backs, the back of our mind. The other thing that we need to look at when we're talking about the middle class, and we'll come to see, what are those factors, and what are those things, and what are those other observations that we came across in this study? There is something we call commodity supercycle that is happening in Africa too. That at some point, you go to places and you find that commodities create a bump in the production or in the general economy of that place. You find a pseudo middle class arising. A good example, and you'll see moving forward, is a city like Lubumbashi. Lubumbashi is a city that grew out of what? Out of mining. And as the commodity prices were stable and going up, Lubumbashi developed into a very, very cosmopolitan area. In fact, some of you who have been to Kinshasa, you'll wonder which part of Kinshasa is that. That's Lubumbashi. It's not even in Kinshasa. It's very complicated. And that comes out of that boom. It creates a pseudo middle class. And when you go there, you invest, and those mines start becoming empty holes, then you realize that your investment went wrong. Back home here, I don't know many of you, if you remember the history of Kenya, that towns like Voi, Juja here was a sisal plantation, and that's how Juja grew. And that was when sisal was a very, very important crop here. You moved to Tanga. Before some of you affluent started playing golf in Rea Vipingo, it was a sisal plantation. And that is what was growing there. You go to Tanga, that was what was happening. People like Mudi Awori started working in a sisal plantation in Morogoro. I'm sure you are shocked to know that. You just go and read his book. That's where he started his life. So it tells you sisal was big. And towns like Morogoro in Tanzania were growing out of sisal. You go to places like Zambia, Kitwe, you're in Lusaka, people are talking, we are going to the copper belt. That's where it happens. Why is the copper belt looking very, very complicated, sophisticated, and having a sort of middle class life? Most of you Kenyans, I know you don't know, but you know that your footballers play professional football in the copper mines in Zambia. You cannot believe that. Because as you're a light in Zambia, Lusaka International, or is it Kaunda International Airport, you are shocked. This airport does not look like, even our new Isiolo is better than that. But it has a middle class, and that is born out of what? Out of that boom that came with the copper. But when copper prices went down, then you start wondering, where is it? I'm looking for this middle class, I can't find it. Let's continue. If you look at what is happening in Africa, there is definitely a commodities boom, and it happens. But then it's so transient. It's like what happened in Angola. Suddenly you find that Angola, where you could almost buy a burger for $100, a burger and chips for $100, you find that Luanda now is not as attractive as it was before. But that boom was there, and it created a community, a society that is a bit more sophisticated, and there was a credible or a tangible middle class there. Let's continue. But despite that picture I've painted, it is clear that Africa is growing, yes, but there are a bit of slowing down in certain areas of Africa. In fact, in the next slide, you realize that the average GDP growth in Africa, when you take the whole of sub-Saharan Africa, which is about 48 or so countries, the growth is about 1.5% on average, which is not a growth that is worth talking about. You talk to economists, they tell you the most desirable economic growth is a growth of about 7%. And those of you who have been in an economic class, you know that if an economy can have a compounded growth of 7% over 10 years, what happens to that economy? It doubles. So it's clear that if our economy as Africa, on average, can grow by 1.5%, then there are gaps in our economy. And those are what I'm calling ominous clouds. And if you look at the number of ominous clouds there are many. I say, there's that author, Greg Mills, says why Africa is poor. He says Africa is poor by choice of its leaders. They choose that Africa should be poor. And he gives, if you follow arguments by most economists, they'll tell you the World Bank, a country like Nigeria discovered oil sometimes in the 60s. You remember the Biafra War. By 70s, they were mining that oil. And you start tracing the amount of revenue that Nigeria has gotten in that oil in the billions of dollars. And you also start tracing how poverty has grown in Nigeria. By the time they were discovering oil, the poor in Nigeria, or the absolute poor in Nigeria, were 19 million. By 2010, the poor in Nigeria were 70 million. So what has oil done to Nigeria? The other ominous cloud, we say, is that Africa is a net food importer. It took Dr. Muya to teach me that Kenya is a net food importer. We always kept on wondering how come some of us grow and we send money to our mothers to grow maize and nothing happens. And Kenya, for a very long time, has been living on food imported illegally through the borders of Kenya and Tanzania and Kenya and Uganda. And the drought in Kenya does not affect food availability in Kenya. The drought in Tanzania, Zambia, and Uganda affects Kenya seriously because we are net food importers, though we do it illegally. If you go further, there are issues like ethnicity that are serious fault lines and causes a lot of problems in this region. And further down, you'll realize that there are very, very, very few countries that still attain the 7% desirable. Because if you're doing the 5% economic growth like Kenya, they say in economics, you're only catering for what? For your population growth. And that is it. It's like a person who is dancing on the spot. Not much is going to happen in that economy. So, on a very, very serious note, even our life expectancy in Africa has really improved. It was about 40. Now it's about 50. But comparing ourselves to the worst Southeast Asia countries is still not very good because our next closest competitor, which would be Southeast Asia, is at South Asia. It should be 64 years. Let's continue. So, what is it that as Africa we should expect? What is it as Africa we should be looking into? And as people who are interested in the middle class, can all those zeros and bad things I've spoken about still leave Africa with a credible middle class that the CEOs in this room, the business leaders in this room, the directors in this room can target and say that these are the people we want to do business with. These are the people we want to provide our services with. These are the people who should buy medical insurance cover. These are the people who should buy into our products. Yes, there's a challenge that commodity prices are falling. Let's just continue, Hima. There's that infamous article. I've already asked Shiro for her permission to use that, so she knows that that is there. But, and somebody mentioned it today, our colleague Julian. I said, I mean, it's not that strategy is not working. Are the SKUs right that are targeting our African middle class? And the question is, right now we've seen the retail space melt down in Kenya, and the question we would like to ask, with that retail meltdown, we've seen top-notch brands like Carrefour saying that they want to take up shopping malls in TRM. And you, people who have visited Carrefour in Two Rivers Mall or the Hub, you know the SKUs that they have. Can they take those SKUs in, let's say, whichever mall, next gen mall, and survive? Will they take those same products that they have into, say, whichever mall that is there in Eastland and survive? So those are some of the questions you should ask. Perhaps it's not that it's all a matter of not having the middle class. Is it? Are we targeting the right people? So that statement, I think, we now know that was taken out of context, and this might not have informed even the change of strategy. But that is something that was picked up, and people say, yeah, Africa has no middle class. It's not happening. Let's continue. Why is this study? Why did we do this study? And why is this study different? This study is different because despite that gloomy picture that I've painted, despite the gloom you've seen in the slides before, we believe that there's a big silver lining in Africa. And those silver linings define what, as we go forward, you'll see, is a very credible middle class. So the first silver lining that we think in our study points to a middle class that is credible in Africa is what we're calling the demographic dividend. If you grew up in the 90s, 80s, like some of us, you went to school and you learned that big populations are not good. Nigeria has a very big population. China has a big population. India has a big population, and big populations is equivalent to poverty. Is that true? Now it is turned around, and we've realized that a bigger population gives us what? An opportunity and ready market to sell. China does not need to sell. I mean, look at your top brands. China can imitate them and sell them to their own, and they have a market for it. India has grown out of India in a very, very, very controlled space, selling to its own people. Facebook is not there in China. They have their own bit, and they're able to survive with that. If you look further and look at countries like Nigeria, we see the population of Nigeria has been able to sustain Nigeria economy despite the ravages of the commodity prices. All the fluctuations that affected most of the places that were producing oil did not affect Nigeria as much as it affected Angola. Nigeria is somehow surviving. And why? Because it has a big and credible population. Back home here, we are getting worried because of our two neighbors, one in the north and one in the south. And we look at Tanzania and say, huh, this guy's economy is growing at a rate that is scaring us. We look at Ethiopia, we say the economy is growing at a rate that is scaring us. But they have one factor in common. There's a clear demographic dividend there because the population is growing and is growing very fast. And that means that they can consume for their they can consume their own products. They can target their own markets. And it's easier, even for people who are coming in. They can target one market with 160 million as opposed to come in to East Africa and target Kenya with it's 45 or 49. I had somebody saying it's 49. However ambitious we are, I doubt whether Kenya can have 49 million people. I think it's about 45. So, I mean, at 45, then Tanzania with another 50, Uganda another 40. But remember, all that combined is not the same size of Nigeria. So you can see what demographic dividend is doing. But again, with that clear, young, and growing population, we can clearly say that that is a dividend that adds to the growth of the middle class. Continue. The other big silver lining is diaspora, and diaspora remittances. If you look at this chart, you realize that as the years have progressed since 1990, you realize that Africa has been receiving less aid and more foreign direct investment, and a lot of the yellow one in the middle, remittances from our people there. And I wonder, you're seeing a lot of people trying to fill in green card. I think this is the season. You'll find a lot of people struggling to get green cards. People who are in their retirement years, they still want to go and try their luck outside there. And these remittances are changing lifestyle. And how this happens is you find people outside supporting the lifestyle of people back home. And those people, lifestyle or LSM grows. I mean, it's not the same person. You go to a person and they don't have any defined or definite income, and you cannot place them in that social class. But they have all the things or the disposable income of a person in that social class. And that is happening a lot in Africa. Whether they are doing legal work outside there or they are Yahoo boys like in Nigeria, that does not count. But the remittances are coming. Let's look at silver lining number 3. And I've mentioned this, the growth forecast in some of the African countries is something to look forward to. And in that slide, you see a lot of countries that are actually expected to grow. Ivory Coast, you have Cameroon, Kenya, Ethiopia. Those are countries who are expected to grow. Kenya, I think there are some disclaimers here that Kenya might change. I think the 6% could have dropped to about 4.8 now. Most of you in this room are feeling the pinch. But then, again, I told you, when you do your projections, you always assume that all factors will remain constant. And that is the hope. But there is a lot of optimism in some countries in Africa. Let's continue. The other silver lining is urbanization. And with urbanization, we say that the more urban and the more integrated people are and living in urban areas, I think you realize that the consumption patterns improve and they start climbing up the social ladder. And how does that happen? I mean, there's a lot of disposable income, there's a lot of aspiration, there's a lot of interaction with brands, and a lot of thinking to raise the income. And we will describe the middle class later. You'll realize that these are people who are aspirational. These are people who live in urban areas. So they're able to understand what needs to be done and how to supplement or augment their income. It's said that Africa, or we expect about 37% of the African population to live, 40% of African population to live in urban centers. Let's continue. So, in that slide, you see clearly that cities are up. People are living in cities. And there's one thing that we like pointing out, and we've observed in most of our other studies, that the West is a little bit more urban. Kenya and East Africa is less urban. And the question we keep on asking, why do Kenyans have 2 homes? Kenyans in the house, why do you have 2 homes? Yeah? Why? You see, it's very clear that Kenyans, unlike other countries in Africa, Kenyans move from their rural areas, get an education, work in an urban center, but have a place where they say they go to retire from a floating middle class income. So you ask our friends from the West, they ask, you have 2 homes, are you rich? Because they know how much money they're paying you. And then you say you have 2, 3 homes, if you come from my village, 5. So, it tells you how rural we are. Take a step down here in Dar es Salaam. Once, and by the way, there is nothing, it has nothing to do with your surname or where you come from in relation to Kenya. Because the Luo in Dar es Salaam and comes from a place called Rorya in northern Tanzania is the same Luo you find in Kenya. But the Luo in Rorya will leave Rorya in Tanzania and settle in Dar es Salaam, and it's done. He'll never go back. You try it with the Luo in Kenya. And then you have a situation where the middle class spends a lot of money and traps it into what? Assets that, yes. You have land somewhere that you've fenced and your brother cannot farm it even though he lives next to you because it's your land and you'll die one day, you'll be buried there. So you think you're a very smart person. You go to South Africa, people live wherever they came from. And once they're in Jozi, they're in Jozi. They die, it ends in Jozi. You move to Lusaka, it's happened. You go Lagos, you're from Onitsha, your Iboness ends. You die in Lagos, you bury in Lagos, and that is it. So it tells you, yes, it's not happening, but urbanization is slowly happening in Africa, and as it's happening, that urbanization is creating a credible middle class that we can target. They might not be able to buy that iPhone, but they're there. The other silver lining, and let me just qualify this statement. It's estimated that 18 African cities will have a combined spending power of about 1.3 trillion by 2030. If you compare with where my bosses come from in France, it's estimated that they'll be having what? They'll be able to spend only 539 billion. So clearly, that urbanization is happening. And you've seen it. I'd say Kenyans, you've seen that urbanization is a clear creator of the middle class. Previously, you left Nairobi to go to the village, and there was no devolution. So you could go to your local in the village and tell everybody, shut up. We have come from Nairobi, we know everything, and we've bought the bar. When you go now there, what happens? You find that there's an MCA who has more disposable income than you. And your local, I don't know, after devolution, is there a county whose value of real estate has not gone up? Every county, you even go to your village, you're told this one is $1 million. Even Mzes who don't know how many zeros are in $1 million. But they tell you this piece of land is $1 million. That tells you that urbanization is really contributing to the growth of what we're calling what? The middle class. And if we can do more of those urbans, I think that's what is informing the making of Nakuru and Eldoret cities. And you can see there's actual growth there, and we can target them. Let's continue. The other silver lining is education. And education is happening. If you look at the second slide, primary education, according to the World Bank, has really gone up. And we've been talking about primary education and saying there's universal primary education, free primary education. It's almost reaching a point where Alex told me that it happened somewhere in Dhaka. Leaders agreed that we should come up with universal primary education, and everybody is pushing towards getting an education. And an educated community or educated society is a society that consumes and consumes almost consciously. One thing you realize with this education, even the most or the least educated now know that there's something called cholesterol. How did they start consuming that? They read packs and tell you, this thing called sauce is not good for your health because it has A, B, C, D. That comes from the education that they have. The other thing about education, you'll realize that education, and especially tertiary education, is very, very important because as we found out, the middle class that we think is here has almost a uniform level of tertiary education across the African cities that we did this study. They have an education and they have choices and they can make those choices. The sixth silver lining is infrastructure. And when you listen to Christo Weise there, he says that by far the biggest restriction is the lack of reliable and constant electricity supply in Africa. That has stopped ShopRite from expanding. I'm sure in Kenya they'll say, no, we don't like South Africans, that's why you're not here. But the truth is, there has been an infrastructure boom. And as economists will tell you, that comes with what? Some trickle-down effect. Whether we love the standard gauge railway or not, or whether the Chinese there, who came to construct the railway ate all the dogs and left us with squinty-eyed children. That does not matter. They change the economy of those areas. If you look at, go backwards, there's that slide. If you look at the way Africa developed, those were the colonial railroads. If you go to any city in Africa, all towns are around those. So we have in Africa what we call development corridors, but of course we know these routes were purposely for carrying what? Raw materials. And we left them like that, 50 years down the line. So look at what Africa Development Bank has come up with. They think that is how those corridors should be. And we are working towards that. I think Kenya, you've seen, you have the standard gauge railway. You might not like it, but it's there. And it has one or two advantages. I think we can have a long argument with my colleague, Dr. Awiti, here, about how viable that is, but it's there. Two, if you look at those infrastructure programs, programs that we are having, they are actually making it easier to do business. They might not be everywhere, but they're making it easier to do business. And that's across. You know the Jibe Dam in Ethiopia. You know about the Inga Dam in DRC. You know all those things we're trying to do. Magufuli wants to do his standard gauge railway. He's given the Turkish company the tender. We are doing another road to Mombasa. We gave the Americans that tender. And that comes with some effect. It comes with some trickle down. And our LAPSET project, I think, has started. The road to Moyale is done. You have an airport in Isiolo. And sooner than later, you'll be able to join it to Southern Sudan. And by that time, we hope that Riek Machar will have been found. And we have our latest additions. I think you've seen things happening. Latest additions like the rapid bus transport in Dar es Salaam. Wonderful thing. I think it's not anything out of this world. It is not a cutting-edge solution, but it's a step far much ahead. I always tell people sometimes you need to take a flight out of Kenya and then land in Nairobi, Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, and take your taxi ride from that roundabout with the funny whatever of animals. And by the time you reach the joining of Mombasa Road, you realize what a lie you live called Kenya. It doesn't take you that way. You just land, get into a taxi, take the ride up to where? To that, join Mombasa Road. It takes you 5 hours to perhaps join that Mombasa Road. That's when you realize, yeah, it's a lie. But these are very, very low-hanging fruit, as we like saying in marketing. We can easily achieve the rapid bus transport and the discipline that comes with that. The other thing that we need to talk about is our digital potential. I'm sure most of you who have traveled understand where we stand with that. I mean, Kenya, digitally, we are doing well. If there's one thing that Kenya beats a lot of other countries that I want to mention here because I might have been thrown out, I think our internet is very, very good. And it's one of the best in this region. So, the number of people accessing internet through cell phones is phenomenal in Africa. We might not have desktops, we might not have access to personal computers, but that is huge, and that is an opportunity. It tells you that there is that middle class. That's why Oppo is here, Huawei is here, Techno, I don't know, whichever, all manner of phone companies. And they know this is a huge, huge potential in this region. The infrastructure, I think, quick fact, you can go through that. We are growing, and there's money that is being spent in our infrastructure. The undersea cable, Kenya has invested a lot in that, and you can see it's actually working. You have one of the fastest internet, and the whole of Africa, you go to the tip of Africa, the south, you go to the west of Africa, and we can communicate with each other, and that is a huge thing. You've spoken about our mobile money platform, something that is being adopted across, even in various variations, even if you're using different aspects of it, but it's working, and it's a platform that Africa is doing. And we see this. By the way, a few years back, in 2006, we did our first financial inclusion study in these parts of the world. And we realized that the bank at that time, people access to any financial instrument was standing at about 5 to 8%. With mobile money, can you guess where it has moved to? And it's across Africa, because the FinScope studies are done across Africa by IPSOS. You realize that that has moved considerably from about 8% to about 24 to 25%, which means it has trebled. Good. The other thing that is worth noting, out of all that, yes, there's an infrastructure boom, but the gap is still big. So what does that mean? Does it discourage us? No. It means one thing. It means that in a short while, or in a few years back, we'll still have people coming here to invest on infrastructure. Because we are only at what? Look at where the rest of the world is. Just look at this chart to your right. The whole world is here and we are there. So that before we could cover that gap, there's an opportunity to invest here. And that will bring a middle class that will be of interest to all of us here. Let's continue. Now, let's talk about the middle class. We've painted a picture. We've spoken about the middle class and the silver linings that could be creating a middle class. If we move forward, that's what Aristotle said, that the most perfect political community is one by which the middle class is in control and outnumbers both the other classes. Let me tell you, if all of us are in the middle class today, would there be tear gas on our streets? This room would be full and would be happy talking about the middle class here. What it means is that, yes, the middle class is very, very important. The middle class is an economic driver. It drives entrepreneurship. And that came out from our study, because you'll find people telling you, yes, I work in the bank, and the bank pays me 40,000. By the way, I always like asking this question. I asked the journalists this question yesterday. Where do you think some of our middle class people live now that have been painting this picture? Do you know the salary of a bank teller, a newly employed bank teller? Average. 40,000. 40, 50? Okay, 50,000. So 50,000, where do you think somebody who earns 50,000 lives in Kenya? Where? Kayole. And if I sent my brand manager to look for middle class, they'll be looking for them where? Kileleshwa. That person lives in Kayole. You're very right. Kawangware. Kibera. And that person is actually in the middle class. It could be the lower middle class, but that's where he lives. And he's a graduate. He's very educated. The problem you think is he earns only 50,000. No, he has a side hustle. He could be selling whatever he sells. He could be selling roast maize by the road. He could be having a cooperative loan, and he has bought 2 boda motorcycles to supplement his wage. So that man is not where you think he is. The other thing that is most important about the middle class that you need to understand is that they consume. They do consume. Most of us, when we go to Waikiki, or when we go to Two Rivers Mall, we end up in Waikiki, isn't it? And it's booming. Everybody's talking about it. Why? Mr. Price was here before. How come we're not going there? They consume. They could have closed by now. Java. Who takes the most coffee at Java? Not you. You guys say, yeah, I don't do Java. I'm sure most of you, I told you, let's meet. What? Do you do Java? So who is making Java tick? Java just opened up in Rupa Mall in Eldoret yesterday. Our latest shopping mall in Eldoret. They opened up. They are in Kericho. Java is in Kisumu. Of course, Kisumu is not a measure because the inspiration in that city can kill you. But it tells you Yes, I'm sure you're asking, how come I've never seen Java in Nyeri? Huko ni kwa Mashakura. So, who is the middle class? The definitions are indefinite, guys. And you cannot use what the African Development Bank used. You can also not use what you find in the World Bank portal. Because it pegs the middle class to what? To a dollar figure. And we at IPSOS and the Unilever Institute have concluded you cannot tie this particular class to a dollar figure. You cannot come and tell this person that because you're earning this much money, this is your class. And all those, you can see, all those people have come to describe the middle class. And they tell you that that's the size they feel it is. My colleague David actually today said that 350 is not, it was somebody, and you know, in research we say one thing, every answer is right until proven wrong by what? Another research. Everything you find out is right until you come, and you can only argue with, you know, I like one analyst who says on TV, bring facts. You know him. Where are the facts? You know him. I mean, research is like that. You can only disapprove it with facts. And I think we have facts that can now prove that the middle class is actually not what you people believe it is. We also know that the middle class comes in we have three levels of the middle class. We have the lower middle class that, can you just, yes. There's a lower level of the middle class that we know they're hanging. And I don't want to call them those ones who are struggling, because there's a video that you'll see of the middle class describing themselves. And the middle class, again, is not that particular person who is described in Njoki Shege's articles, that they drive a blue Subaru, or they could be living in my servant's quarter somewhere because it's my son. Not that kind of person. We look at how much disposable income does that person have, and how much wallet, I would call it, how much of that wallet of his is available for you and me to plan around. There's a video that is coming that you'll try and listen to these people talking about their position across, or their views about their class and their beliefs across Africa. If you ask a Kenyan, how are you? Say, Tukot. That person who tells you that, most likely is that class you're looking for. They are there. The other thing you heard them saying, they visit what? Malls. So tells you they know brands. They could be getting those brands where? In Toy. They could be getting them where? In Gikomba, even if it burnt today, it will still open. We have hope. But they are very conscious. They walk into shopping malls, and if you doubt it, you go to Garden City Mall. I want you to take a demographic view of everybody who walks in there. You'll find people coming from the different parts of this town that you might not think are middle class. They are walking in there. They might only be having money for one pizza, but they are there. You look at whatever they are wearing, and you can tell, yeah, this is not really people from the class that these people are targeting, but they're there. And that pizza or burger or whatever has been bought in Big Square. So the truth is, yeah, the middle class is there. You go to Nigeria, you've heard them describing themselves very well. Ivory Coast, Abidjan. You go to Addis Ababa. It's very clear that we have a middle class. They consume, they're educated, they understand brands, they're aspirational. They might be at 3 different levels, as you'll come to see in our data that we'll share with some of you. But the truth is, we have targeted the wrong group of people, thinking that they're the middle class and forgetting that the real middle class is there, and they are not where? In this room today. Because the ones in this room are not the middle class. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Good evening, all of you. Thank you for staying, because you are actually going to be part of the best part of the show, which is going to kind of help make sense of this, and we're going to bring it back to you, because you're not just sitting here as passive participants, but you got a lot of knowledge and experience from your own experiences that we'd like you to bring to the conversation. But allow me at this point in time to invite my esteemed panelists, and I'll start with Mr. Baka Magunda, who is the MD at Diageo. Mr. Baka. My next panelist is Sarah Katusia, who is the MD for Mediacom. Sarah. Is she in the room? Okay. Then we'll have Nima Wamai, who is the director at IPSOS. And then last but not least is my very good friend, Julius, who is the Director General of Vision 2030 Delivery Secretariat.
Well, thank you. I work for the Vision 2030. I'm the Director General. And what I do on a daily basis is to continue supporting the framework of Vision 2030 and to make sure that the agencies that have responsibility for implementing the over 180 flagship projects that we have identified do their work.
Like you heard, my name is Nema and I work for IPSOS. I look after their media across sub-Saharan Africa. What does looking after media mean? It basically means I'm interested in audiences. I love to know, what do you watch when you're watching TV? What do you listen to if you listen to radio? What do you do when you're online? What do you do when if you consume print? How do you consume it? Where do you consume it? Why do you consume it? So why is this study very important? Because of the questions I get asked by a lot of you in this room. How do I make my advertising dollars work the best for me? Because that is the most expensive component of my marketing budget. How can I be sure that if I take my dollars and I put it in this particular medium, it will deliver for me in terms of sales of my product? It will deliver for me in terms of retaining my customer base.
My name is Baka Magunda. I'm born Ugandan. I run the Diageo business for Horn of Africa and Indian Ocean. I'm based in Addis Ababa. I started my career as a marketer. I now have been doing general management for 15 years.
But Julius, I think what I find particularly interesting for the vision that the country has set and how that is predicated on advances in welfare, which basically means people have money, incomes are rising, and government can provide basic services. But what I'm concerned about is the fact that as these populations rise in their ability to afford stuff, they move away from offerings that are provided by the government in terms of social services, education, health. They begin to develop what Baker just called those attitudinal aspirations and saying this is not good enough for me. So they become very selective in terms of what they want. They would want to go to Nairobi Hospital, not to Kenyatta. They want to go to Aga Khan and Pisha. They want to send their kids to Riara and all of these things. But that also imposes a certain financial burden to them, which then constrains their spending power. What is it that the government is doing about social services that are of quality that then enable the spending power and disposable income to rise? Because I think that's going to be critical for this expansion of this class going forward. So I would like to just kind of spend a few minutes just to give us a sense of where the thinking is in terms of creating some relief at the household level.
Your question is actually quite on point. And I say so because when you look at Vision 2030 as a framework of development that underlines Kenya's aspirations, we actually look at it from the point of view of the individual. What will the person be enjoying in terms of their kind of livelihood? And that is why, as we look at the overarching goal of Vision 2030, we say Kenyan citizens should be having decent lives. And it is all citizens, not just select few. Because again, just reflecting on the discussion we had earlier on, some of the challenges that we have, which sometimes also hinges on ethnicity, is where services seem to be for the select few, irrespective of how you define those select few.
Then I'll ask you this last question, and then I'll invite the audience to give their own reflections. But this relates again back to some of the points that Baker made. How does this space then make demands and help redirect market research? You know, just this segmentation, this alone. I think, you know, you described, you know, CEOs sometimes being unenlightened and asking, you know, they just want to sell something. But they don't understand, as you said, middle class is not one thing. It is differentiated at so many levels. And as Baker said, the decision and the conflict around the decision process generates all kinds of sometimes unanticipated outcomes. That you might have something sitting on the shelf for exactly the same reason that it doesn't check all the boxes for the people. So how does market research then respond to enable, to give the tools and the information that then creates the intelligence that they need? Can we still go on doing business as usual in market research?
No, I think it's clear we can't, at least from this research. I think some of the challenges we face as market researchers, and also when you're dealing with marketers, a lot of marketers, I'm sad to say, don't really understand the brands that they're selling. You have a brand manager maybe sitting in an FMCG company selling cooking fat, which is supposed to be sold to a middle class, let's say vulnerable middle class mama in Kawangware. And that brand manager gets a media plan from the ad agency recommending that they need to be on certain number of channels. But then the brand manager says, but I don't listen to those channels. I don't watch them. I want you to take that money and put it in what I watch and what my friends listen to, because my friends will not have had that campaign. So what happens? What happens is it fails. It fails. It fails for the simple reason that you forget that when you're a brand custodian and a brand manager, the brand is not necessarily about you. It's about whoever it is the company is targeting. And that's where market research is very important. But market research is only important insofar as it is actually used. Because we can give you this data for African lions. We can tell you that there are 3 categories of middle class. We can tell you where each of these categories consume media. But if you don't listen to it and say, I heard my competitor on this particular station, so therefore take my budget and put it on this station, it makes a nonsense and a mockery of everything. So I feel like there's a level of education that our marketers need to have. I think it's not as robust as it should be. And a lot of the mistakes that are made on brands are because of having that brand manager or that brand custodian, one who forgets that it's not about them, or that brand custodian, to use Baker's term, who does not actually go into the trade to see, what do you say, to smell the customer, the customer's breath, yeah? And because of that, makes very, very wrong decisions. Yeah.
Thank you. So now I would like to turn it over to the audience, and this is not going to be your kind of typical Kenyan panel situation where you're going to ask the panelists a question. You two are an expert. So what I want to hear from you is what was your aha moment? When did the penny drop during this conversation?
It's Shiro from Nestle. So I'd like to make 2 points. One is about the article that keeps being quoted.
Thank God. Clarify.
It would be remiss of me not to say a word about that. So that article is over 2 years old. That interview was done with my boss, the CEO of our region, at a time in early 2015 when we were restructuring. And the question that was posed to him by the Financial Times journalist who conducted the interview was, what had led to the separation of about 100 employees, about 50 employees, from both our regional office as well as our East African office.
What we said of the people we tried to categorize in those classes, these are some of the common characteristics. Perhaps let me say that, and you know, as we want to say in this part of the world, the language I was using came by the ship. So I can blame the ship first, and then tell you that what I meant was, these are the characteristics of people who fall in this category.